So just so you're aware, this is not mine. This was just sitting here. It's not even turned on. This presentation is coming off my iPad by way of my iPhone. So this is an all iOS presentation, which is a little bit ironic considering the subject matter, wherein we express doubts, but we also embrace our doubts about the iPad. So we're going to talk about kind of the iPad versus Mac question from a little bit of a different perspective than what you may have heard before. If you read the same kinds of websites and articles and stories that I do, you have read about how people have switched from using a Mac to using an iPad, and how this has revolutionized their lives, and how happy they are to now be using an iPad instead of a Mac. As I look out over the assembled crowd here, I think I see maybe one iPad and the rest are Macs. Two. I don't have a judgment about this. It's okay. Because I am a Mac geek from way back. I am kind of a Mac curmudgeon. And I'm someone that kind of says, well, I would like to be able to use an iPad for all of my stuff, but I really need some convincing. So I would like to think that I am a relatively open-minded curmudgeon, if there can be such a thing. I don't know if that is a contradiction in terms. But I would like to give you sort of my perspective on the iPad versus Mac situation as it is today. And not because I'm trying to convince anyone here to ditch their Mac, because I know I'm not going to ditch my Mac, but because this could be give you some important perspective for your customers, your clients, people who are coming to you for advice about what they should buy, what platform they should use, or how they should think about these two different but very similar platforms. So I have just, as one way of establishing my cred, apart from the fact that yes, I've written a bazillion books and I've been doing this for decades, I have all the toys. Okay, I have all the toys. And I have, in most cases, quite a few generations of all the toys. And I don't think of myself as an Apple fanboy, but I am a fan. I am an enthusiast because, historically, Apple's things have made the stuff that I need to do easier than the other people's things. And historically, Apple's things have worked together with each other better than other people's things have worked together with each other or with Apple's devices. So it's a very simple story for me. I use this stuff because it makes me happier and it makes me more productive. But the thing is, despite having had all the toys, and I have my iPhone 10, and I have my iPad Pro, and I have my AirPods, and I have all the things. I don't have a red dot on my watch, so don't judge me. I know, right? I know, right? But I still keep coming back to the Mac for actual productive work. Now, it is a little bit unfair to compare the iPad with the Mac because, are you going to compare the original iPad with an iMac Pro with, 427-inch 5K displays? What is your basis of comparison? Well, I want to kind of focus on this particular comparison. This is a very interesting one to me because you have two devices that weigh almost the same, that have almost the same screen size, that cost almost the same, that have the same amount of storage, and they've mostly different operating system. Yes, we know there's internal stuff that's different, and yes, we know like this one has a Lightning port and that one has a USB-C port, but this is the sort of decision that a lot of people need to make. Well, I have about $1,500 to spend on a thing. Should I buy this one or should I buy that one? Now they're going to look at the thing on the left and say, well, I don't know. I can save $300. And then by the way, not only do I save $300, I get two really great cameras instead of one sucky camera. I still get the keyboard, but I also get the gyroscope and the accelerometer. And I also get 4 speakers. And I also have a cellular option, which could be interesting to me. And a lot of people are looking at that and going, now wait a minute, why would I even want the other thing if it's $300 more and it doesn't have that stuff? And the answer, which everyone here in this room who has a Mac in front of them can clearly say is, well, because it's a Mac, of course. That's why. That's the difference between these things. It's not the hardware. It's because that thing is a Mac, and we all know that Macs are the way you get your work done. All right. So let's go back in time to 2010, April 2010, when the very first iPad was released. Now, at this time, I was living in France. The iPad came out in the United States like a couple months before it was released in France. But Tanya Angst, sitting there in a sweatshirt, bought an iPad for me. She gave it to a friend of hers who happened to be coming on vacation to Paris a couple of days later. Her friend hand-delivered the iPad to me, making me, I'm pretty sure, the first person in France to have an iPad. So, you know, that's got to count for something, right? And like a month later, my wife and I had a baby, and our son was born in a hospital in Paris, and we took our iPad with us to the hospital to play music while my wife was in labor, and everybody just thought that was so cool, and I think it's kind of cool too. So I got the very first iPad, and the very first thing I did after I got this iPad was, of course, to write a book about it, because that's what we do, you know, we write books. Now, Take Control did a bunch of books about the iPad. We did a book about, you know, using it for media consumption and, you know, security and networking and stuff. Well, it fell to me to write this book, Working with Your iPad, How to Get Actual Productive Stuff Done. And so I was looking into all the ways that people do actual business, like money-making activities, the sorts of stuff that you need to do in work for this. So I wrote this. It was, you know, revised a couple of times. And then a couple of years later, we actually did a live video series, Take Control Live, Working with Your iPad. And I had this sick setup with, I had like this jailbroken iPad that I had the software that I loaded on it so people could see a little dot where I touched on the screen, you know? And I was streaming this live. I had like my picture in a little window and like my iPad screen. I went through this whole thing, like these 4 sessions of training people how to do work on their iPads. So I've been looking into this topic of iPad productivity since way back when. But the thing is, even when I was doing this stuff, I was being kind of disingenuous. I wasn't practicing what I preached. I wasn't using my iPad for productive work. Now, remember, we're thinking back in the like 2010, 2012 time range. And people would say to me, well, why would you even want to use an iPad? Why, you know, you have a Mac, you have lots of Macs, you know how to use a Mac, the Mac is fine. Why would you even care that, I mean, why is it such a big deal to you, Joe, that you would want to use your Mac or your iPad instead for productive work? And I'd say, well, you know, just these reasons. For example, because honestly, you know, the iPad is something that's a lot more comfortable to lounge with. It's more portable, it doesn't get hot, you know. It's a nicer thing to carry around with you to a coffee shop and stuff. And so I thought it would be really nice to be able to do my work on an iPad instead of on a Mac. Now, again, in this era, we're talking, you know, 2010, 2012-ish, basically my full-time job was writing books for Take Control. So one of the things I couldn't do for work is write Take Control books, and that's kind of a deal breaker for me. At that time, when we started Take Control, we used Microsoft Word as our authoring tool, and then those were dark years, and no one should ever be forced to use Microsoft Word for anything. But we eventually moved to Pages for a couple of years. And that was better in some ways, not as good in other ways, and we eventually moved to Nice Writer Pro on the Mac because that let us do a lot of things that Pages couldn't do. The thing is, in 2013, Microsoft Word didn't exist on the iPad. Pages existed, but it sucked. And by the time Microsoft Word did exist, and it does exist now, and it's fine, and Pages does exist, and it's fine too, we've already moved on to other things, and we now have problems that those tools can't solve for us on the iPad. But it wasn't just about writing books. There were other things I needed to do on my iPad as well that I just couldn't do, especially not in, again, 2012. And you know, this is my list. Other people's lists may differ, and some of these things are no longer issues, and there are more things that are issues today. But suffice it to say that although I would have really loved to do my work on an iPad instead of a Mac, I couldn't. So around 2013 I bought an iPad, and I kind of felt like, well, I'm sorry, I'm just going to use my iPad for recreational purposes. I had convinced myself after all this effort that it was really just, I mean, not to trivialize the just for consuming content, but it really wasn't a thing that I could use for getting work done. Now, I do want to say, I love taking my iPad to the gym. I do this. I stick it on the treadmill and I run while watching Netflix. And for me, this is a great thing to use an iPad for. The iPad is great for reading books, especially if you're like in bed, or lounging on the couch. It's great for I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, and I've got IMDb here in my lap, and I've got the movie on the screen. So I loved having an iPad. I now have my 5th iPad. My wife has an iPad. Both of my kids have their own iPad. So I love iPads. There's nothing wrong with that. But what was missing for me was being able to use that in place of a Mac. These are my kids, by the way. They're in this picture. They're sharing an iPad, but they each have their own. And aren't they adorable? But again, they use the iPads for playing games, and a little bit for learning. But they're not doing very much productive work, and they really should be. I mean, they're of an age where, other people would be sending them off to work in the mines. And I don't need them to do that. But, they could at least be writing articles for me. All right, so until recently, I was using a circa, 2013 iPad Mini 2. So this is great. It was small, light, very comfortable to use, had a Retina display. This model didn't have Touch ID. It didn't have the full split screen multitasking capabilities and so forth. But it was great for me. And this is what I would take to the gym, and this is what I would read with. So it was fine enough that as Apple would release new iPad models, I'd look at them and go, well, that's nice, but that's still not nice enough. Not nice enough that I'm going to be able to do real work on it, so I'm just going to pass. And I kept passing year after year after year, because I felt like spending that extra money wouldn't make me more productive. Well, as time went on, I started noticing that things were changing in the world. I started noticing that a lot of people were using their iPads as their main computing device, and I started noticing that iPads were outselling Macs. By a lot. If you look at the last quarter, okay, yes, of course, we know the iPhone sold 37 bajillion units. But the iPad, even in what is supposed to be, a slump, not like its heyday, it still sold more than 10 million units last quarter, and the Mac sold less than 5 million units. And I look at that and go, well, there has to be something to that. Surely it can't be the case that only the Mac-using people are being productive in their work. And then there are people that I knew and respected who had announced with great fanfare that the iPad had become either their only computing device in some cases, or their main computing device. And these are people with serious tech chops and tech cred. Jason Snell, for crying out loud. He was the editor-in-chief of Macworld, and yesterday he's tweeting out pictures of his, the new iPad stand that he just got, and he has a mechanical keyboard hooked up to it with a USB adapter, and this is his writing rig, right? And so I'm thinking, well, that's interesting that these people are able to use an iPad. And then a lot of other things came up that I started noticing, like speed. All right, well, this is the iPad Pro that I have over here. It's the latest model, and it is faster than the current model 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display. That's pretty interesting. That's pretty important. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily better, but it is faster. The displays have gotten crazy good. We now have these gadgets that, like, you know, I tried using the old-fashioned, like, rubber tip stylus on an iPad. Oh, I really hated that. Apple Pencil is really cool. Now, I'm not an artist by any means, but this is great for little sketches. It's great for taking notes. And this makes the iPad a completely different kind of a thing for me, and I couldn't do that with my iPad mini. The smart keyboard, too, really changes things for me in a way that no previous accessory did. We also have changes, I mean, the changes in iOS 11 in particular, but really for the last 2-3 versions of iOS, have done a lot to make it a better productivity tool. You have the Files app, so finally, look, we can get in all of our stuff, whether it's stored locally on the iPad, or it's in iCloud Drive, or Dropbox, or wherever, almost like the Finder. Crazy! We can move and rename files and do stuff like that. We have, I love split screen mode. Finally, I can actually do, you know, honest to goodness, multitasking. There are real versions of Microsoft Word and Pages, and okay, they're not quite up to the level of their desktop counterparts, but they're pretty darn good. And this thing, you know, I write and edit and publish books. So one of the things I need to do a lot is edit text on the screen. And I'm constantly have to, you know, position the insertion point in just the right place and select just the right amount of text. And this used to drive me crazy. And then a couple of iOS versions ago, Apple added this thing where you have the on-screen keyboard and you touch with 2 fingers and it becomes a trackpad. And all of a sudden, it's just like you're moving a mouse, because it's exactly the same, because where, you know, when the mouse is over text, you get the little insertion points. So you get that here too. And all of a sudden, I can very precisely position the insertion point and select text, and editing stuff on the iPad didn't suck anymore. So that was really great. And I'm not going to belabor this, but it has always upset me, just philosophically, that if you want to make an app that will run on the iPad, you have to make that app on a Mac. And you still do if you want like an app that you're going to sell in the App Store. But increasingly, Apple has been sort of loosening things up, and developers have been getting more creative. And now there are a bunch of ways that in one fashion or another, limited though they may be, you can actually create and run live code on your iPad. You can write Python scripts and run them on your iPad. You can write PHP programs, run them on your iPad. There are some things that are not exactly code, and then there's like Swift playgrounds where you can write and run Swift, but you can't, you know, compile an app. But still, this is all progress. This is ways that I can do stuff on my iPad that I didn't used to be able to do. And of course, let us not forget omni-automation, which Sal is going to be talking to you about this time tomorrow. And this is way cool, because this takes something that you could already do on a Mac. Not very many people did, but you can, JavaScript for applications. So you know, pretty much any place that you could use AppleScript, you can also use JavaScript on a Mac. Now, you can write JavaScript to control various ones of Omni's apps. You can write it on a Mac and use that JavaScript on an iPad, or vice versa. And get apps to talk to each other and have this portable JavaScript. That's way cool. But I'll let Sal tell you that story tomorrow. So I noticed all the above things. I noticed that my list of things that I couldn't do on the iPad seemed to be getting shorter. And so I had been in this mode for like 5 years of just, yeah, the iPad is just a thing that I sit on the couch with, but not a thing that I do real work with. And I decided to challenge that bias. So I went to my friendly neighborhood Apple store, and I bought myself a top-of-the-line iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil and a smart keyboard. And I started doing tests and research to figure out kind of how far things have come since I wrote off the iPad. What could I now do in my actual work that I couldn't do before? And I tested apps, and I downloaded stuff, and I did, you know, a lot of web searches, and I just did a lot of thinking. And I decided to do a little thought experiment. So just go with this, okay? So I pretended that I'm on a desert island with only my iPad Pro, and somehow mysteriously an awesome Wi-Fi connection. We're going to yada yada that, and you know, a few other necessities of life. So I'm on this desert island, but the point is that I am completely cut off from my Mac. I don't have a Mac. I have sustenance, and I have Wi-Fi, and I have my iPad Pro, and somehow in this environment, my livelihood depends on my being able to run my business from my iPad Pro. Can I do it? Now, before I answer that question, and I am going to answer that question, I want to admit that my answer might not mean anything. For a few reasons, not the least of which is that I am not, in fact, stuck on a desert island. That is to say, like all of us and pretty much all of our customers, we actually do have choices, so it's a little bit of a false experiment. And of course, I do have quite a few Macs. That's not a problem for me. To the extent that this does work, my results may or may not be what you care about or what your customers care about. They may have needs that I don't, I may have needs that they don't. And of course, there's a big difference between it is possible if my life depends on it, and this is a thing that I would voluntarily choose to do every single day. Okay, so with those qualifications out of the way, let's get back to this question. Can I run my whole business on just an iPad? Now, of course, my whole business is publishing books. All right, so just your mileage may vary, but this is my question. So, after considerable research, I realized that there are two equally true answers to this question. The first answer is yes! Yes, I can run my entire business on just an iPad with some qualifications, like there's some pain, it's not perfect, it's okay. The other true answer to the question is no, I cannot run my business on an iPad, but even then I have to say it's more of a not really. It's more of a no unless I cheat. And I am willing to cheat, and there is an asterisk there, which means we will come back to that in a few slides, and I will tell you how to cheat. But, because it's a public service, right? But the bottom line is the average score was sort of, well, it's an ambiguous answer. You can, not fully, not joyfully, not super great productivity, but you can, I can, this is, again, my answer, I could do it. So let me just go into a little more detail about what did and didn't work for me and why. So we're going to start with writing. No, sorry, we're not going to start with writing. I looked at the wrong thing. I want to start with things that were just fine on the iPad. Look, Slack is just Slack. Slack is fine. Nothing more needs to be said about it. Social media is all just fine. No worries at all. Most things that can be done in a web browser are also just fine. You'll notice there are two asterisks there. We'll come back to that too. Accounting, for me, is fine because for me, I had already made the decision years ago to use QuickBooks Online. And that's another whole story, and I wrote an article in Macworld about why I did that. But for my business, QuickBooks Online is perfectly good, and on my iPad, I can either use the QuickBooks app, or I can use QuickBooks Online in a web browser. Either way, I can do all the accounting-y things I need to do just as well as I can do them on my Mac. No worries at all. Email is okay. Look, I can send and receive and file email, all right? I don't have rules. I don't have smart mailboxes. I don't have keyboard shortcuts to automatically file a message in a particular mailbox. I don't have tagging. I don't have all of my super cool little plugins that I have on the Mac. So it's not great, but it's okay. I can get the job done. Now, writing turned out to be a real sore spot because even though Pages on the iPad is pretty good and Word is pretty good, I need to do very particular things with my writing. I need to have automatically numbered figures. I need to have dynamic cross-references to those figures. I need to have we're constantly doing these crazy text transformations. We have to make very, very specific kinds of user-defined character and paragraph and list styles, and they all have to work just so. And even though there are lots of text editors and word processors on the iPad, none of them do all the things that I need to do. And even to the extent that they get close, I can't like assign all the keyboard shortcuts I want to do all the things. It's harder, it's more time consuming. I'm not going to say a whole lot about cover design, but this is a proxy for page layout. So on a Mac, I have InDesign, and I can get Quark Express. There's Swift Publisher. There are tools on the Mac where you can lay out a flyer, a magazine, a book, a catalog, an encyclopedia. You're not going to lay out a catalog in Pages on an iPad. It has sort of some page layout capabilities, but not like that. So that's less than suboptimal. Automation, you know, look, it has come a long way, but I wrote a book, I won't say the book, I wrote a book on Mac automation. I am really, really into Mac automation, and I use Apple script, and I use Automator, and I use shell scripts, and I use Keyboard Maestro, and I use all this stuff, and man, like, if anything takes me more than 2 keystrokes to do, it just drives me crazy, so I'm like, stop, I gotta write a script to do this. And even though you can do some kinds of automation on the iPad, it just doesn't come anywhere close to what I can do on the Mac. You can make a PDF or an EPUB, that's an ebook format, using Pages on an iPad. You can do it. You cannot make a PDF or an EPUB that I would be willing to sell because they're not good enough. They don't have all that special sauce that we add after the fact. I use Panorama to about half a dozen very sophisticated Panorama databases to track our orders and sales and coupons and all kinds of stuff. And crucially, we rely on Panorama to figure out how much we have to pay each of our authors in royalties every month. Now, we have a database with 600,000 records in it. And complex logic that even on my desktop iMac takes 45 minutes to run a certain procedure every month. It's like crunching a lot of data. And yes, there are database apps for the iPad, but nothing that can touch this. So I have heard rumors that there could be a version of Panorama for iOS at some point in the future. And if there is, and if it can do these sorts of things, that would be really lovely. But suffice to say, this would be a sticking point for me. This would be a sore spot, a thing that I couldn't do on my iPad unless I completely re-engineered all these databases to live in the cloud someplace and used a web-based interface to do that stuff. So all in all, although I can get stuff done, this is the sort of answer, I can save my business from peril by using my iPad on my desert island, but my efficiency is very, very poor. Now here's the thing. Earlier I said these were the 2 devices that we were comparing for the sake of this talk. The iPad Pro and the 12-inch MacBook, because these are the ones that are most similar hardwarily. And if this is what you're going to ask me if I have to choose between, I am definitely going to say the MacBook. Now, I don't actually want that MacBook. I really want an iMac Pro, which I hear is coming very soon. But that's not the point. If I had to choose between these 2, I would absolutely choose the Mac because I know that all those things that I could sort of kind of do on the iPad, I can really, really do well and easily and quickly on the Mac. But this isn't necessarily the choice. This doesn't prove, in other words, that the Mac is superior to the iPad as a platform. Because if that were true, then I would have to choose this Mac over that iPad, and I would not. Oh boy, there was a day that I really lusted after this Mac, I have to tell you. I wanted one of these so bad. I know that iPad would make me way more productive than that. So I thought, well, I wonder how far this would go. Would I be more productive on today's iPad Pro than on a PowerBook 100? Yes, I would. No question about it. In fact, I thought about it, and that still holds true for this. and it still holds true for this, even holds true for my beloved titanium PowerVolt G4. It even, I know it's a little bit of a stretch, it even holds true for the first generation Intel-based MacBook Pro, which I also have. And the reason it holds is that the latest version of Mac OS that this can run is pretty old and doesn't have a Retina display, and so on a bunch of different metrics, the iPad still makes me more productive than that would be. And so it's really not a question of iPad or iOS versus Mac, it's really a question of iPad versus which Mac. And I'm not even going to talk about like Chromebooks or Android or Surface. Like, we're just going to take that as read, right? Okay, is that safe to just say we don't believe in or care about the other? Just not enthusiastically as though you agree. Okay. I promise you that I tell you how to cheat. I'm going to tell you how to cheat. So, look, I have Parallels running on my Mac, and because I have Parallels running on my Mac, I have Windows 10 running on my Mac. And whenever I need it, I have, various flavors of Linux running on my Mac. More often, I have older or newer versions of Mac OS running in a virtual machine on my Mac. So using Parallels for me is a way to cheat while I'm running on my Mac, to not have to go out and buy a Windows PC too. One of the things that Parallels includes is this thing called Parallels Access, which is a sort of, it's like screen sharing but kind of fancier. And so one of the things I do when I have my iPad in my lap and there's an app on my Mac that I need to run, well, I just open up Parallels Access and there's Panorama or there's InDesign, and it's a little harder to use it, in that environment. And it does require me to own a Mac that is turned on and has the software loaded on it, so it's really cheating. But but at least I don't have to have that with me. I have the Mac, somewhere else in the iPad in my lap. So screen sharing, there are lots of different ways to do screen sharing. That's just how I happen to do it. You don't have to even own a computer. You can rent a virtual machine in the cloud someplace. It can be somebody else's computer. It can be a server somewhere. If you just need to do one or two things that require an app to be running on Windows or a Mac, you can. There are fairly easy, inexpensive ways to do that. Those are also shell scripts. So you're familiar with the Workflow app for iOS that Apple purchased not too long ago. It's an automation tool, and it's really cool. And one of the things it lets you do, if you get to a point where, like, okay, if I were on a Mac, what I would do at this point is I would run a shell script to do whatever the thing is. Well, what you can do is if you can connect your iPad via SSH to some, Mac or Linux computer or something out there that can run, like Bash, any kind of shell, then you can embed that in your workflow. You say the workflow gets to this point, okay, now connect to this remote computer, run this shell script, get me a result back, and continue with my workflow. That's one way to do it. There are other ways to do it, but as long as you have, in some form or fashion, access to some remote computer, whether you own it or not, whether it's even a real computer or not, there are ways of cheating and doing most of the things you do while only owning or holding or having access to an iPad. The two asterisks were about Safari, and I told you that most of the things that I do that involve a web browser are just fine on the iPad, and that's true. It's especially true now that it's a lot easier to, like, oh, I need to upload a file. Now I really can. I can upload a file from Dropbox or from iCloud Drive or from wherever. There are some things that don't work quite right, like Apple News Publisher. Does anybody here use Apple News Publisher? Okay, you know Apple News, right? The app on your iPhone. There's this app. Sorry. Anyway, Apple has an iOS app called Apple News, and if you run a website or an RSS feed of some kind and you want to get your content into Apple News, use Apple News Publisher. It doesn't work. It's like you can go to iCloud.com and there's a web app there, in your web browser to like configure that, but you can't do that in Safari on an iPad. There is no way to do this on an iPad. You have to use a Mac or a PC. There will, of course, be occasional sites that require Flash. God, it's 2017, and sites that require Flash or Silverlight. And there are some sites that just inherently need to do stuff that need something that Chrome or Firefox has that Safari doesn't have. And in some cases, this is even the Mac version of Safari doesn't have the right stuff yet. So that does occasionally happen. So it's almost okay, but occasionally not. All right, so having done that thought experiment and having achieved those results, I wanted to think through what would have to happen for this to stop being a problem for me. What would have to happen for me to actually be able to only use an iPad and not ever have to worry about a Mac? So my personal answer includes at minimum the following things, all of which could happen. I don't know that they will. I expect probably some, but not all of them will, and some of them could take a long time, but this is my list. I need more screen real estate. Like, okay, 12.9 inches is nice, but no, at home I have two 27-inch monitors, and that's not enough for me. I only have 2 because my desk won't fit anymore. If I could have 6, I would use 6. This size screen, very portable, doesn't show me enough information. Split screen is great, but I often need to be able to see 3 or 4 or 5 apps at once in order to do my thing. I want more multitasking. Good page layout tool, I mentioned something like InDesign, even if it's not quite so fancy. I need a lot better tools. There are lots of PDF apps out there for the iPad, but none of them do the kinds of things that I need to do to PDFs, which are really tweaky. And again, I need either Panorama or something that can do approximately the same things to enable me to crunch data in certain ways. I do a lot of video interviews, a lot of remote video presentations. I do not use my Mac's built-in FaceTime camera. It sucks. I use a Logitech webcam. Like the FaceTime cameras are okay, but I really want to be able to use the camera I want to use and position it where I want it to be. I'd love to be able to plug in an external webcam. Backup and restore is a little bit painful for me because, yes, of course you can back up and restore your entire iPad. Hard to restore just one file, at least if you use Apple's tools. I still need to be able to run other operating systems, and this is the one that's most likely to be a sore spot for the longest period of time. And I would like, this is not so much a need as a want, I would like to be able to develop a full-blown, sellable iPad app on an iPad. Even if I got all those things, I wouldn't be as efficient as I would be on a Mac unless I also could assign system-wide keyboard shortcuts, because I do use an external keyboard with my iPad quite a bit, and I rely very heavily on keyboard shortcuts. And I need more scripting. There's stuff that I do on my Mac that can really only be done with something like AppleScript or JXA. And you know, Omni automation is a huge step in the right direction, but I need something that is going to be able to reach everywhere. Now, our customers, like the people that buy books from me, the people that buy computers and service, stuff like that from you, don't necessarily have the same constraints that I do or that we do. So I wanted to just end with some thoughts about how you could, what advice you can give to other people who are trying to make up their minds about this. Because, I'd like to think it's all about me, but it really isn't. So, I'm not going to belabor this, but I'm just going to mention a few things. If you are talking to a customer who is used to using a Mac or a PC, and most of the stuff they do is done either in a browser or in a built-in app like, text editor, mail, they're going to be fine with an iPad. If you're a writer, depends on who your publisher is and what kind of stuff they're publishing. If I'm your publisher, I'm going to say, I'm really sorry, but you can't because I can't. But if your publisher just wants stuff in Markdown, great. If your publisher just wants docx files, go for it. So it kind of depends. If you are a publisher, you know, again, the page layout tools and the heavy-duty text manipulation, really something you're going to need a Mac for. Musicians are kind of a mixed bag. I have my sister-in-law is a professional musician. She's a singer-songwriter. She's recorded many albums. She loves performing with an iPad. She has, like, you know, she does these songs with like all these layered loops in it, and she does all kinds of crazy stuff. And for certain kinds of musicians, it's great. GarageBand on the iPad is fantastic. You can use it with a built-in keyboard. You can hook up a MIDI controller to it. You can plug in a guitar. Like, it's good for certain kinds of things. If you're going to record, you know, a 32-track studio album, it's, you know, probably going to push the limits. I know that people who draw and paint and do visual things and retouch photographs often really like the iPad for that. And especially if it's stuff you can use a pencil for, that's fantastic. But again, it depends. If you're probably not going to make a Pixar movie on just an iPad. Obviously, if you need a platform-specific app, you're going to have to use that platform. You need to work with big databases, you're going to use a Mac. And if you want something, if you want to use both, and you know that you're going to encounter limitations, but you really just want the iPad not as a main tool, but as a supplemental or emergency backup tool or something for travel, then brilliant, buy both of them. Now, if you do advise someone to get an iPad, I would like to offer 2 additional pieces of advice. Tell them to please get the smart keyboard. I mean, okay, yes, you can buy a keyboard from somebody else, but I find the on-screen keyboard to just be, it upsets me. Okay, but let's just say it upsets me. I'm a touch typist, and I can't touch type on that. I need the tactile feedback. So the physical keyboard for me makes all the difference. I love having the physical keyboard. And even though I am not an artist, I love having the pencil as well. Jim?
I don't have the smart keypad, so I have a question about it.
Yeah.
You're talking about the navigation.
Yeah.
If you're using the smart keypad, is there not a way to do that?
No, you have to, the on-screen keyboard has to be on screen for you to be able to do that.
So that kind of negates the text editing is easier.
I would actually unplug my keyboard to do editing. Yeah, sorry, life is complicated. I'm not here to change your mind. It's okay. It's all good.
But I said no with my
Right.
I mean, I love my iPad.
Yeah. My second piece of advice is for you, and as well as your customers, to be prepared to change your mind. I am more prepared to change my mind now because I can do maybe 30% of my productive work on an iPad now, whereas a few years ago it was 5%. So I am now more willing to pay attention to how the platform evolves and keep trying new things. So I'm just saying my advice is, even if you know you can't do it, don't write it off entirely. Other questions? Thank you for your kind attention.